Hi, and welcome to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast presented by Wolf Precision Incorporated, where we learn about and share long range shooting and custom rifle building. I am your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. Hi, and welcome to episode 161 of Wolf Precision's Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building podcast. I'm your host, Jamie Dotson, and welcome to the show. In this episode, we're going to be talking about caliber selection. So you want to get into long range shooting, and this is a common topic that you'll go into every forum, every board, every magazine. Here it is. Everybody runs down this rabbit hole, and this is particularly important for me to share just a lot of this because we have this conversation a lot with customers, and there's a lot of, I want to say, peer pressure and decision making and just constant worries of what you read compared to what you need. So this ought to be a really good one. I asked Richard to come back and share his list. He did make a list on what he would choose, and he can go over his parameters on how he made his selection or how he qualified his selection, and I'm going to do the same, but I think it'll be a really good one because we're going to be open, we're going to be honest, and we're going to share with you as marksmen and as people who love the art of long-range shooting and hitting stuff, and knowing how much calibers affect our abilities to shoot rifles and shoot rifles well, this is a really important one to us because it deters people and it ruins shooters sometimes with decisions that might not be the best that they've made through peer pressure. So it ought to be a great podcast. We're looking forward to this one. So thank you, Richard, for joining us here this morning. And without further ado, here we go. Before we get started, I do want to say thank you to TriggerTech. TriggerTech is the maker of fine rifle triggers. They're made in the great country of Canada, our friends to the north. They make straight shoes, curved shoes, pro shoes, smooth shoes, two-stage, single-stage, and for lots of different makes and models. We put them in all of our custom rifles here because they're safe, they're easy to install, and some of the best. So if you want to upgrade your rifle and your shooting game, upgrade your trigger, and you can do that at triggertech.com. That's triggertech.com. I'd also like to thank MDT, maker of fine rifle chassis, with a huge selection to choose from. Just amazing on how many stocks and chassis that they actually have that you can choose from to upgrade your rifle. And through experience, I will tell you that getting a rifle to fit you perfectly is really important. And if you want to upgrade your rifle, factory or custom, you can stop over and look at all the great options they have today. So you stop over to mdttech.com. That is mdttech.com today. So we're going to be talking about getting into and selecting calibers. This is always a hot topic. Go on to any forum and you'll see people arguing, standing on their step stools, yelling back and forth at each other from their podiums about why their selection is the best and why you're wrong. And I always look at it a little bit differently, and so I'm going to share with you how I look at calibers and how I make caliber selections. And let's just say that I was sitting across the table from someone that was brand new in shooting, in which we often do. You know, we get a lot of students that come through our shooting school here that honestly have never fired a rifle at any distance whatsoever. And, you know, eventually some of them lead down to buying a custom rifle with us, which we really appreciate that with our system here. But it always leads to caliber selection. And I try to give honest advice. I try not to steer people and give them and make them build what I would build. So this would be, from my perspective, me sitting across the table from you, someone who, you know, had shared some experiences with us here at the shooting school and are now looking to take that next step in building your rifle. And you asking, hey, what caliber do you think out of? And so we're going to cover it in two sections. We're going to talk about match shooting or maybe long-range shooting, and then we're going to talk about hunting caliber selections. So what I would like to do is bring Richard in and chime in a little bit on his thoughts on how he approaches the subject. I'll come on and I'll give my list and reasoning, and then I'll let Richard come on and give his list. So I'll be the first one to take a swing at this, and then I'll let him follow up. So good morning, Richard.
Morning.
How was the weekend recovery?
Well, it was a short weekend, right? Because we had the shooting school finishing off through Saturday. And then there was no Grand Prix this weekend. So I had some time to do some other stuff around the house.
Oh, the things to do list. It doesn't go away, does it?
No.
Well, we had finished up a class, and I thought this was a good opportunity to talk about the caliber selection because we see this quite often. And in this last class, we did have a gentleman shooting a 308 through the course. Not a heavy rifle, probably medium weight, high brand, probably not the greatest shooting rifle, I would say, but for a new shooter, I think his caliber selection was too much for him. I think when you start talking caliber selections, especially with new shooters learning, this can be a hindrance. And they always take people's advice with the best intentions. I don't think anyone gives people advice that says, hey, I'm out to hurt you. But there are things in the training world or the shooting world that this can have a negative effect for sure. So I'm going to go over my list of if you want to get into long-range shooting, and that's what this whole series is about. And I want to share with you my top for match shooting or for fun, going out and shooting matches or shooting steel. And then I want to share with you my selection for hunting. So if I was to pick my number one for the match shooting, and my parameters would be that you're not reloading yet, I would say 6.5 Creed would be the absolute best choice, especially if you have the opportunity to go with a heavy rifle, add weights, all of these things that you're going to really tame it down recoil-wise. And I say that over the 6 Creed, to give you some reasoning for it, is because I think the 6mm's are a little bit harder to spot at distance. They don't hit the steel quite as hard. They don't leave as big a signature if you do have a miss. I think it's a good training caliber. If I had to pick my number 2 cartridge, if you reload or not, it doesn't matter. I would say if I was to pick my number 2 cartridge, I would lean towards the 22 Creed because of me personally. It's one of my favorite cartridges to shoot. It's easy to reload for, hits the steel hard, hits the dirt hard if you miss, and probably about 50% of the recoil on the shooter. And then if I had to pick my 3rd cartridge, I would probably lean towards something like the 6BR or 6.5x47 Lapua, a real match grade cartridge. Again, you got to reload for it. There isn't a lot of good factory ammunition, both low recoiling. They all come with a little bit of things and learning curves, feeding and functioning issues that happen, like with the 6BR, take special magazines. But if you're reloading and going that route, I think both of those are great choices for like my number 3. How I selected my choice and trying to say, okay, when I pick out a cartridge, the first thing I look for is like, what's the availability of ammunition factory, or not just factory, but abundant factory and relatively inexpensive. And then if you are reloading, my parameters would be easy to reload. So the last thing I want to do is tie into a caliber that is super high maintenance or known to be super high maintenance. For example, the 6x47, it is known to be super finicky for reloading. I know lots of people that reloaded it, and a lot of people have said the same thing. Hey, this is sort of a tough cartridge to find that sweet spot. And so I look at it that, I want the average reloader right out of the gate to walk away making great hand loads and have the caliber be less sensitive to being finicky to reload for them. And I think the 22 Creed, the 6BR, and the 6.5x47, both or all three, are super easy to reload for. Even a beginner will be able to make great ammunition. And if you're not reloading, then my choice would be the 6.5 Creed, just because I think quality ammunition is everywhere, still relatively inexpensive. And I think for new shooters, it's a lot less recoil than the 308. You're going to learn a lot. You can game it by putting weight on the rifle, and you're going to see impacts, which I think is huge, where if you chose something along the lines of a 308, which is very traditional, even in the heavy rifles, sometimes you still get enough bump and hop for new shooters to lose the sight picture. So I'll let Richard jump in on this and talk about, we're talking match shooting now and going over what we would suggest, or if my friend was sitting across the table that was new to this type of shooting, this is what I would say.
Oh, there's so much to unpack there. So Jamie knows that probably 15, 16 years ago, I went down the 6BR route because it's such an accurate cartridge. But I just, the magazine solution hadn't been figured out yet. And so I could never get it to feed. And so I ditched the rifle. But the rifle I had, I did nothing special to it at all. And it literally shot like single hole groups. The first groups out the rifle, which are always the test of whether it's going to be a good rifle or not. Those first groups on that clean barrel, and they were literally single holes. I don't know whether I've still got the targets, actually. I might still have them. But they were single hole groups at 100 yards. And I was just like, I was so enthusiastic about it, but then I just could not get the thing to feed. It's like the whole thing with, how much money do you put into a rifle to accurize it? If it's not already accurate, don't put any money into it, just sell it. But this rifle was incredibly accurate, but it wasn't fit for my purpose, which was to make a new match rifle. And I thought 6BR would be an interesting experience. And then, after that, I just went straight to 243, which you all listeners know that I'm a 243 advocate. And 6 Creedmoor as well, because the ones I've shot here have been very accurate. All right, so back on task. So I did I just gathered some quick data here. I was actually looking at it from a slightly different view of recoil energy. It's one of those things that, the big bang of the cartridge going off and the recoil energy are the things that affect the shooter quite a lot. So based off of, roughly a sort of 10-pound rifle, and then also I was looking at it in terms of the energy, where is the drop off on it'll do enough damage to an animal to knock it over. Right, so here's some 4 cartridges that I was picking at. So 223 Remington is ubiquitous for the AR-15 crowd, but it's also a relatively good hunting cartridge for those people that are on the East Coast, and it's also a good training cartridge because you can't ignore the wind with a 223 Remington. So I've just built one just for shits and giggles. It's going to be my hunting rifle. And it's really good. I mean, it's solid out to 600 yards. It's actually not too hard to shoot at 600 yards. I haven't actually taken it beyond 600, to be honest, yet. But it's not bad. And the only problem with that as a hunting cartridge, of course, is it has huge bleed off of energy. Now, just based off of what I was looking at using Ford off, basically you run out of steam at about 400 yards. So I don't think that's bad. It's definitely effective. If you choose the right bullet, you're in good shape. Is it a match cartridge? Well, I would say no, but Jamie's proved me wrong along the way over the years, making it hard for himself, but also doing very well at matches. So yeah, I mean, in the right hands, it's a good cartridge if you've got enough experience with it. And you're willing to believe in your wind calling abilities, then I think you're not in right. Then you're not going to be in bad shape.
I'll chime in. The 223 is an incredible training cartridge. You have to, and maybe it should be on my list, I guess. I mean, it's one of my personal favorites. I've learned so much running that, and I would challenge myself to shoot it at matches and stuff when I should be taking another caliber and going just butt naked and with just no tactical advantage at all, no speed advantage, no ballistic advantage, no wind advantage, and just go in with skill set and say, okay, I'm going to challenge myself in the arena and say, how well can I run a 223 and compete against calibers that just decimate it? And I learned a lot, and follow through and all these things are a lot easier to learn. It's just that the long stuff, the only thing to caution is beyond 800 yards, they're super hard to spot for new shooters.
Absolutely.
Even in matches, I've lost points where I've gotten hits at like 900 and 1,000, but the people spotting can't see it, and that's my bad. I mean, I'm taking a cartridge that's hard to spot anyway.
Yeah.
But the rules at the matches, if they don't see it, you don't get the points.
That's right. Yeah.
But you can't underplay the value of it. That's for sure.
Yeah. Not really a match cartridge, but if you're a sporting type, then it can be a match cartridge.
Yeah.
But as a hunting cartridge, as a lightweight hunter to put into a lightweight rifle, it's actually a very, very good choice. Very good, because the recoil energy, like on my list here, I'm gonna go up in recoil energy, and if we call this one a 0 recoil energy, there's no such thing as a 0 recoil energy, but we'll call it a 0. The next one on my list is the one that I like the best, which is 243. So 243 is twice the recoil energy of 223, carries its energy at 660 foot-pounds out to about 800 yards. So in terms of a hunting cartridge, it's got plenty of oomph. And everybody knows it as a very solid hunting cartridge for medium-sized animals in North America.
Sure.
So in terms of a match cartridge, I've been shooting it with, and I've still got a boatload of them, 105 AMAXs. I'll swap over to the ELD match eventually when I've run out of 105s. But I mean, it carries energy. It's got plenty of get up and go. It does run out of signature on targets when you get into that 700 yard range. You can sort of miss you can miss and the bullet just disappears and you don't know whether you were 10 foot past it, 10 foot around it or just off the plate.
Yeah, the ground eats it up and you don't see that splash.
Yeah, especially wet ground that bullet will just go home and you'll have no clue of what to do next. So that's I personally like 243. It's easy to reload. As a hunting cartridge, I mean, there's a lot of options for 243 hunting. I mean, I think Hornady has probably, 5 or 6 in their range, in the 100 grain range. I don't know. Mm-hmm. But there's a lot of choices there and pretty flat shooting. So that's why I went to it after shooting 308 for a while, just because it was much flatter shooting. It would buck the wind, better bullets, faster. It was
less recoil.
Yeah, a lot less recoil. Mm-hmm. So then next on the list, in terms of recoil, would be 6.5 Creedmoor. So that is, again, just slightly more than a 243. 600, still 600 foot-pounds, but out to 700 yards. So it's a little bit less than 243. But, I think it's an equivalent. And, of course, with a larger bullet, you've got a good signature. So for match shooting, I think it's very apt. And, of course, you can always go to the lighter weight bullet. You don't have to shoot that 147 grain?
Yeah, 147, 140s.
Yeah, so you can go down to the lighter bullet and get a little bit more velocity if you feel that that's important to you. Because Richard thinks velocity is king. So
right.
Half mv squared. So velocity is important there. So it carries plenty of energy. And of course, 6.5 is the caliber of the last 10 years, basically. It's come from nowhere to prominent position. Everything is available in 6.5 Creedmoor, and therefore it's available everywhere. Now, I don't know whether that counts if you're an African game hunter or you're going abroad or whatever. I don't know whether that's still the same situation. No experience of that. But I have to think it's got to be one of those cartridges like 300 Win Mag and 30-06 that you can pretty much, if you're going to a hunting area, there's going to be something available that you can buy. So that's an ideal cartridge. So then lastly, of course, I have to go with 308 because that's another one of those cartridges that's, it's, what is it now, 70 years old. I think it was introduced in the 50s, right? Early 50s. So you can get that anywhere in all flavors, fast, slow, heavy, light, hard hitting, not hard hitting, target, hunting, whatever. But when you look at it in terms of recoil, it's 4 times more than a 223. So for a new shooter, it's not the most ideal solution. So there you go. So what do you pick?
So covering the match in the hunting world, I sort of went at the list a little bit differently. I went with, for new shooters, what would be more available for ammunition first, and then went from there into people that are hand loading, sort of the shootability side of it. And I think Richard went from energy first.
Yeah.
So recoil up through what will make your list. And all good choices. For hunting, I had to think about this a little bit because we had a really good customer. He's actually coming in this Friday. His name's Jim. And he had just been laying awake at night worrying about his caliber selection for this hunt that he's getting ready to go on. And he listens and then he does research and then he researches and then he listens and he does research. And I said to him, congratulations and really kudos to you for giving it this much thought and actually worrying about it, because there would be people who'd be they wouldn't give it a second thought and just go with what their gut instinct said or what somebody told them, right? So he's second and triple guessing himself. He's going for elk, and the caliber that he decided to build was a 6.5 Creed. And for me, as far as the hunting caliber, for kids, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. The 223, I think, is still capable, 100, 200 yards with lots of good bullets and super easy to shoot. That's when my daughter started shooting for sure. But if I was to say, okay, what are my top 3 hunting cartridges? My first choice would go to the 6.5 Creedmoor, just because of its universality of shooting down to sub 100 grain bullets, low recoil, varmint, and then you could get up into My personal favorites as you get into the 140 class. And the reason I always say 6.5 is because it has the highest sectional density of any bullet design. So it's a very long bullet and narrow, which means it delivers energy through the target. It's able to put a lot of energy on a narrower point, and the lead core is narrower. So it doesn't, like a 30 cal has a much wider core, so when it hits, it opens up faster. The narrower and the longer the core, the more it's able to drive. And the magical word they use is sectional density, but in Europe, the 6.5 by 55 Swede is still the most famous moose cartridge. It's slower than the 6.5 Creed, and they knock moose down with it every year. And I find that, me personally, I chose a 6.5 Creed because I believe most shooters can shoot it well. So you often hear people talk about shot placement, right? And the shot placement isn't the rifle's capabilities, it's yours. And most newer shooters or even experienced shooters, sometimes they get into calibers sort of like dancing with someone who's going to punch you every third step. And it's just not a good dance. And your ability to shoot is just hampered by you're never comfortable with the rifle. So I think the 6.5 is in that realm that most people could be able to shoot it well. And if you break it, suppress it, it's not going to thump you. My second choice for hunting cartridge would be the 22 Creed. Speed is king. That hydraulic shock wave you send through an animal, that cavity that opens up with that first initial implosion. I'm speaking to a lot of ballisticians as well as people that have worked for the FBI, and a lot of this, they will tell you that speed is king, and that kills animals, and that also kills people. So speed, high speed, tough bullets, when they enter, that big cavity that you see open up when you see people shoot ballistic shells, that's super damaging to every body part, every organ, and then punching through from there. And so when you talk about, 60 and 70 and 80 grain solids capable of going from, 32 to 3,400 feet per second, and the ability to drive through the targets, I think a lot of, as long as you keep your shots in reason and you reload, I'm going to throw that in the ring and say that that's my hunting cartridge. I mean, that's what I plan on taking for a lot of different things. Now, I have to keep my shots within reason. It's not a long-range cartridge. It's a killing cartridge as long as you use it in its zone, right? And then my third choice, if I was to pick a hunting cartridge for those that have to have a Magnum on the list, I'm going to say 300 Win Mag. And I say that because it falls in that parameters that everybody makes great ammunition for it. It is not finicky to reload like the 22 Creed. It's not picky at all. You'll find 300 Win Mag ammunition from Africa to Australia to Russia, right? And then the other thing for me, too, is I always caution guys when they're selecting new cartridges, like all the PRC craze right now. We're building a ton of them. We have a ton of them on order. But you have to understand, and here's my perspective of it, there is some advantages that happen when you make a longer neck and you change the case body and shoulder angles for feeding and functioning and sizing. There is that stuff. But in the end, it's just a glass that serves to drink. If they didn't invent a new cartridge every year, you wouldn't buy a new rifle. And so it's still a bullet, whatever caliber it may be, going downrange at a speed. The cartridge design itself is just a glass. If you're ordering a cup of coffee, do you care? I mean, does the coffee taste any different if it's got a special curve to it and a spout that pours it over your lips at a different angle, right? And so I always look at it from what's got history as far as shooting, and the belted magnums have set more world records in bench rest at 1,000-yard bench rest than any cartridge in history. And 300 Win Mag was the 1,000-yard bench rest cartridge for decades. And so it is really accurate if loaded correctly. Now, granted, there's some advantages to the new case designs, but I would say that the 300 Win Mag is a very mild recoiling magnum. I think in a properly weighted rifle with a breaker or suppressor, it's not that unfriendly to shoot. And I think there are a fair amount of people, more people that could shoot it better than when you get into the big magnums that just wallop the shit out of you. So I always caution people when they're running down that rabbit hole, and I probably sounding counterproductive because I love the 22 Creed. The 22 Creed is a 22-250 done right. The 22-250 just didn't have the case capacity to push the heavies up past that 3,000 feet. Plus, they had a very small neck, short neck, and they stretched real easy. There was a lot of things about the 22-250 that was awesome, but was never meant to shoot heavy bullets, where the 22 Creed now fills that void, right? It's able to. It's what the 22-250 could have been had heavy long bullets been available back when it was designed. But the thought back then was super high velocity, short, light varmint bullets, 100, 200, 300. So that's why I love that cartridge. But 300 Win Mag would be my, if you had to have a Magnum choice. for all the reasons I listed, besides the fact that it is one of the easiest cartridges to reload for. You can really load it down with a 208 grain bullet at a reasonable speed. It's a slow recoil. It doesn't hit you hard like a 7 mag does. It slaps you. So that would be my choice. The 6.5 Creed, I think, covers just about anything you're going to want to go after in North America within reason and within a reasonable distance. The 22 Creed is my personal favorite. It's just for whatever reason, I just love that cartridge. I just think it's one of those awesome shootable killing cartridges, match cartridges. If I could only choose one, I think I would choose it.
Well, the 22 Creed is turned into a bit of an everything cartridge. And it's turned into a match cartridge because of that 88 grain ELD, which is phenomenal BC.
Yeah, and a 90 grain A-tip at 5.85.
Yeah, and we loaded up.
God.
What were those? We loaded up 73 grain Control Chaos solids, and they were zinging out there at like 3,400 on a mild. Was it 34 or 33?
Yeah, 34 on a mild load.
On a mild load. So.
And speed's king with damage. So, you know, I think a lot of shooters would enjoy shooting it and be better shooters in a shot placement. And then my last one, I have to put it on there. It's my personal favorite. I love the 300 Win Mag. If you have to have a Magnum, I think it's one of the few that's actually shootable and that more people can shoot it well. It doesn't fall into that Weatherby category to where a select few will shoot it well and everybody else just endures the punishment it dishes out.
Right. So I can see that there's a lot of choices that you have to make, and I think I agree with you. So I mean, 6.5 is another do-it-all. You know, if you're only going to have one, which you know you can't afford to just go out there and buy 5 rifles out of the gate. Nobody. And you probably shouldn't do that either because it's the guy with one rifle that you got to be worried about, right? So yeah, I mean 6.5 is an absolute got to be the go-to today, but I still believe there's a lot of life left in 308, but it's not necessarily the ideal beginner's cartridge.
I agree. It's like the Swiss Army knife of cartridges because you can shoot 200 grain and 110 grain bullets through it. So the only reason it didn't make the list is I think the 6.5 has replaced it, and it's getting almost to the point to where it is like the new 308, that there's just ammo. Everybody's supporting it.
That's right.
10 years from now, the 308 and 243 are both incredible cartridges, but I think the 6.5 is going to replace it as the new 308.
It's very possible.
Yeah.
I mean, it has the ballistics, the bullets are there. You know, I mean, like from my data here, I mean, it's still got enough energy at 700 yards on target. So, it's such a hard thing.
Now, I don't want. I'm trying not to persuade you on your list, but what was your list for hunting? If you had to pick, talking to a new shooter, what would you choose or suggest to them?
East Coast or West Coast?
Universal.
New shooter.
Top 3.
Does he have any other rifles?
I would say most new big game hunters don't. They're going at it from scratch and taking everything that they can read online and losing sleep over why you have to use a 300 Weatherby. And I mean, you really get people grandstanding. And my opinion is just my opinion. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. I'm just sharing with you mine. And I don't want to taint your opinion. So your top 3, if you could, to a new shooter going on a hunt, this is going to be his rifle for everything from elk right down to white-tailed deer.
I think I would say you've got to go out shooting. Go somewhere, go with a friend, go shoot a little bit and see whether you're recoil adverse. If recoil scares you, then go 6.5. If recoil doesn't scare you, then buy a 300 Win Mag. Because with a 300 Win Mag, like you just pointed out, it really is. It can do everything. It's kind of overkill, right? But boy, will those varmints get blown up.
We have friends of ours that used to do shooting down in Virginia. They would load up the 300 WSM and 300 Win Mags with 110 grain bullets.
How fast?
I mean, oh my God. I think they were like 3,600 feet per second.
Yeah.
And they were launching these things like feet into the air.
I mean, bet.
Brutal. So you do have the fun option to play around with.
By the way, I noticed on the data sheet for those Control Chaos, they're good to 5,000 feet per second.
Wow. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's on the data sheet.
How would you shoot it out to get it that fast? You'd be like the old black powder gun. You'd be ramming the powder and stuffing it to the bottom of the
down
case.
your 300 Win Mag to 22.
There we go.
You shoot a 60 grain bullet.
That's crazy. Well, it wouldn't have much recoil, but have a hell of a boom. Speaking of booms,
goodness.
one of the reasons why I put the list up there too is because, I mean, just muzzle brakes in general on hunting rifles. When you get into the super big calibers, a lot of times that's the first thing that they do. And I went out testing a rifle yesterday for a while, putting a muzzle brake on it to give our suppressors a break. And because it's hard to put high volume rounds through a suppressor, they get hot. And I won't do it again. It sucked. I mean, I had earplugs in and muffs in. And after an afternoon, like just an hour sitting there shooting, I was like, yeah, I reminded myself how much I really do not like hunting muzzle brakes in general, but especially on a hunting rifle. Said, no way, I'm out.
Well, we've had years of, shooting suppressed now. So we've gone to the we've gone to the dark side.
And once you go that route, it's hard to go back. Like
it is.
I was saying, I don't even want to go on a hunting trip where it's not legal to use a suppressor.
Well, if you remember last year, you were testing your hunting rifle with that 16-inch barrel and the 7-inch suppressor, and I just thought we were on the line, and you were just you touched one off, and I just about levitated. I thought you were shooting a long barrel and a 9-inch suppressor.
Yeah.
So I mean, even that can get loud.
Yeah.
And we all know, like, we're not talking Hollywood suppressors here, so it's only noise reduction in the 20 to 30 decibel range. So it's still a bit of noise, but muzzle brakes are just the worst. I mean, they're just uncomfortable.
And I don't want to take this off topic too much. I appreciate Richard taking the time to talk about this part. But just real quick, though, too, on suppressors, because we had a customer call yesterday and ask about, well, he was shooting another rifle and how it recoiled a little bit less. And they were trying to tell him it was because of the stock. And I started digging more into it. It could have been the weight of the rifle, but the fact that he had a 7-inch suppressor on one gun and a 9-inch suppressor on the other.
Oh, that's huge.
And I was trying to explain to him that it's, although they're explaining it to him that the one stock, quote unquote, hides the recoil, which I think was a little fib. But we know from experience, if you put a 7-inch suppressor on a gun and a 9-inch and you shoot them, those two extra baffles make a world of difference, not just for the noise, like Richard said.
Yeah, it's night and day difference.
Yeah, when I cracked that round off, even though it wasn't crazy loud, it was quite different from what he was used to hearing. And then you'll notice a recoil difference just going from a 7-inch to a 9-inch suppressor as well. And so even just going suppressed doesn't remove all the noise and doesn't remove all the recoil. Suppressor design and length and diameter all plays into the equation of how effective or how much percentage they reduce it. And so that was interesting to have that conversation with him yesterday. So the misconception is that the 7-inch suppressor had more recoil than the 9-inch suppressor, and it was being explained to him was because it was a stock design, when we know that the 9-inch suppressor is going to reduce that recoil it's not going to be 40 more percent, but it's going to be a noticeable difference for sure.
Yeah, I think that's stretching the realms of the math.
Yeah, you're connecting the dots pretty loosely. So we should probably take some time to maybe dive into one or two of these calibers with some specifics since we threw them out there. So maybe if you're up for it, Richard, next week, before we dive into some of the other things that we want to talk about maybe we should take the top one or two of these calibers and just dive into some of the history of them, some of the capabilities, at what distance we know that they've been shot to, maybe give you something more than just, hey, here's a list, know. So maybe dive into the 308, maybe the 6.5 Creed, the 22 Creed, the 300 Win Mag, and go a little bit more into the history of them, the types of bullets that you can shoot, the energy that you can expect, how much recoil we have. There's ballistics calculators tell us how much recoil we're feeling. So maybe we could pick out a couple cartridges. If any listeners out there would like to send us an email on what maybe they would like us to talk about of these cartridges, that would be fine. You reach out to us, contact us, send us an email. Your thoughts?
My only closing thought was I looked after the conversations last week. I did look further into the Bergara Tikka experience there, and the one thing I did notice was that the Tikkas are slightly more expensive than the Bergaras, and also the magazine cost on the Tikkas, because they have a custom magazine as opposed to the Bergaras that have their standard AICS mags. So the Tikka mags are more expensive. But, how many mags do you need for a hunting rifle or whatever? I mean, maybe 2 just in case you get in a pinch, but it's not like, every other rifle or pistol you have where you have to have like 10. You know what I mean?
No.
Or
No.
more.
Yes. So it's a close enough cost difference. It's worth it if you want to upgrade to the
Yeah.
Tikka, but there is a cost difference.
Yeah. I think that I did some internet trolling, and I think it seems like, without testing them side by side, don't hate me for this, but it does seem like the Tikkas tend to be more accurate than the Bagaras, but not by much. And of course, you know, when you're doing internet trolling, you don't know whether it's the quality of the shooter or the quality of the rifle or something else, right? A lot of people, after they've had a rifle for a while, they might damage the crown. There might be some other wear factors that come in there. They might be shooting controlled chaos rounds at 5,000 feet per second and might shot the barrel out.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, stuff like that. So you got to take that stuff with a pinch of salt. But it does seem like the Tikka is the way to go. So I can continue my advocacy of Tikka. This is not a paid advertisement.
No, and if you if you just look at the truth behind the curtains, though, Seiko and Tikka have been around a long time. They have made sniper rifles for many years.
Yep. Is that the TRG?
Seiko TRG.
TRG, yeah. I shot one of those in 338. That was a hammer.
Yeah.
It was a very accurate rifle. As well as being a big boomer, it was very accurate.
Yeah, so they've been doing it a long time. And,
Yeah.
you know, the Europeans got a way of making stuff pretty damn good sometimes, too.
Sometimes.
So before we continue on, I do want to say a quick thanks to Krieger Barrels. Speaking of barrels, they are a family-owned and operated business out of Wisconsin. They make cut-rifled barrels. They're one of the oldest custom barrel makers in the country, and they have a new program called Krieger Direct where you can log on and order your barrel and have it in as little as 2 to 3 days. So if you want the best and you need it now, and you would like to purchase an American-made product, you can stop over to KriegerBarrels.com. KriegerBarrels.com and just look for Krieger Direct and get your barrel in as little as 2 to 3 business days. So a couple parting thoughts here. We do want to give a shout out to everybody that's joined us on the online long range shooting school. I really appreciate it. We're moving right along. I think over 13, 14 hours of content. New video will be coming out this Saturday, and then we'll be getting into session 3 very soon. So thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us on the podcast. Thank you, Rich, for joining us. Next week, we'll talk about 1 or 2 of these calibers, maybe a little bit more detail, just about some of the histories of them. I think it'd be interesting. And then if you'd like to learn more, again, about our online long-range shooting school, you stop over to wolfprecision.net, where you can attend our basically 3-day long-range shooting school from the convenience come from your own home. And then we have a 1-day graduation class coming up where you can actually come after you've attended the school and spend a day with us in the field learning and putting to test everything that you've learned in the online course. So that page is up. The dates will be announced soon, so we're looking forward to that. So, Richard, thanks again for taking the time to join us here.
Yeah, this was fun again.
Yeah. So thank you, everybody, for joining us here. We really appreciate it. If you enjoyed the podcast and like to share it, we appreciate it. If you want to leave us a nice comment, that helps us a lot in our standings. But thank you so much for joining us. My name is Jamie Dotson. I'm your host, and you are listening to the Long Range Shooting and Custom Rifle Building Podcast.